Everyone assumes ancient Egypt didn't have a rot problem, that the desert did the work for them, dry air, blazing sun, nothing decays, case closed. That's not just wrong, it's backwards. The Nile Valley, the only strip where Egyptians actually lived, was a humid, waterlogged floodplain sitting inside a furnace that hit 120 degrees Fahrenheit. Heat plus moisture isn't a preservative. Biologically, it's a 5-star hotel for bacteria. So by the end of this video, you'll know the actual 4-part system a kingdom built, mostly by trial and error, to win a war they didn't even have a word for. Let's go. Picture the geography, because that's where the myth falls apart. Egypt is desert, yes, but nobody lived in the desert. Everyone lived on a green ribbon of mud and irrigation canals, a few miles wide, flooded every single year, squeezed between 2 oceans of sand. That ribbon grew reeds, mold, and standing water, under a sun that pushed ground temperatures past 150 degrees. Dry heat preserves. Wet heat rots things fast enough to make your refrigerator weep, and nobody in Egypt had a refrigerator. So let's get specific, because it's genuinely alarming. Fresh fish, a Nile staple, starts breaking down within a couple of hours at Egyptian summer temperatures. Milk turns before you'd finish the cup. Raw meat left uncovered is unsafe within the same afternoon. Bread grows visible mold in a day, sometimes less. This wasn't an occasional inconvenience. This was the daily, non-negotiable condition of being alive in the Nile Valley. Every single meal, a race against organisms nobody in Egypt had ever seen or named. And the stakes weren't just an upset stomach. Grain was the entire economy. Wages were paid in bread and beer. Taxes were collected in grain. The whole machine of the pharaonic state ran on a crop that had to survive, undamaged, for up to a year in storage through the hottest months of the calendar. Lose the grain to mold or weevils, and you don't just lose dinner. You lose the ability to pay a workforce, feed an army, or make it to the next flood. Rot in Egypt was a threat to the government itself. So the grain store was the first target, and it never stopped being under siege. Insects laid eggs in warm sacks of wheat. Rats tunneled in from below. Rising damp crept up through mud brick and turned the bottom layer of a silo to sludge within weeks if nobody intervened. And nobody watching was never really an option. Egypt tracked grain the way a bank tracks money. Scribes counted it in, counted it out, and wrote down exactly how much came back short. We even have the paperwork for when it went wrong. Ration records from the tomb workers' village of Deir, el-Medina log complaints about bad grain and bad beer. Short deliveries, spoiled batches, disputes over rations, written in the same flat administrative tone as everything else. One note simply says a delivery came in deficient. No drama, no explanation, just a scribe stating that what arrived wasn't what was promised. Rot wasn't a rumor. It was showing up in real food, in a real village, often enough that somebody wrote it down. Here's the thing nobody tells you. Egyptians had no word for bacteria, no concept of a microorganism, nothing resembling germ theory. And yet, over centuries of watching food fail the same ways, they built a working defense against an enemy they couldn't see, name, or understand, purely by noticing what worked and repeating it. That defense had 4 parts. The first one solves the exact granary problem you just heard. Start with the silo itself because the shape is the solution. Granaries were built tall and narrow like clay beehives, raised on packed rubble or brick, which kept rising damp off the grain. A narrow neck up top meant less surface exposed to humid air, meaning less moisture getting in. Some were plastered smooth inside specifically to deny insects anywhere to burrow. Nobody knew what a mold spore was. They just knew grain stored this way lasted, and grain stored differently didn't. And they built accordingly, generation after generation. But grain wasn't the fragile one. Fish and meat were, and you can't build a beehive silo for a fish. So weapon 2 was salt. Egypt had a massive natural source at Wadi Natrun, the same dry lake beds that supplied natron for mummification, and that same moisture-pulling salt was packed onto fish and meat to cure it. Salt draws water out of tissue, and bacteria need water to survive, so a salted, sun-dried fillet stopped being hospitable to anything. Egyptians still cure fish this exact way today, in a dish called Fesikh. The recipe is thousands of years old. Weapon 3. Sealing things away from air. Wine, oil, and beer were stored in ceramic jars plugged with clay or resin, sometimes stamped before it dried with the batch, the year, even the vineyard. Sealing does two jobs: keeps insects and dust out, and slows the oxygen exchange that spoilage organisms need. Archaeologists have opened 3,000-year-old wine jars and identified, from residue alone, roughly what was inside. That's not luck. That's a sealing method still doing its job 3 millennia after the people who made it were gone. Weapon 4 is the strangest because it doesn't fight decay. It weaponizes it. Beer and bread both start from fermenting dough, and fermentation is, technically, controlled spoilage. Egyptian brewers were cultivating a yeast that outcompeted the harmful bacteria in the same batch, and the alcohol and acidity left behind made the product actively hostile to whatever would have ruined the grain first. Rather than only keeping bacteria out, they'd figured out how to grow a friendly one fast enough to starve the dangerous ones out. That's applied microbiology, with zero microscope. Hold on, because one more substance in this story behaves completely differently, and you've probably already heard about it. You've likely seen the claim that archaeologists found a pot of honey in an Egyptian tomb, thousands of years old, still edible. It sounds like an internet exaggeration. Let's actually check it, because the real answer is stranger than the meme. Here's what's true. Honey found in tomb contexts, some analyzed and dated to roughly 3,000 years old, has shown no significant spoilage. But it's not magic, and it's not really preservation the way we've been describing. Honey is naturally close to bacteria-proof on its own. Low water content, high acidity, and a trace enzyme bees add that slowly produces hydrogen peroxide. Nothing can grow in it whether the jar's sealed or not. So this isn't a fifth weapon in the war. It's the one food that never needed the war fought over it at all. And that didn't go unnoticed. The Ebers Papyrus, a medical text from around 1550 BCE, prescribes honey directly onto wounds. And modern lab analysis backs this up. Honey genuinely suppresses a wide range of bacteria on contact. Egyptian doctors had no concept of infection the way we do. They just noticed a wound dressed in honey healed and wrote the recipe down anyway. The same substance that never rotted in a jar was also being used, correctly, as an antibacterial, 3,000 years before anyone knew what a bacterium was. Put it all side by side. A granary shaped to deny moisture. Salt pulling water out of flesh. Jars sealed to choke off air. Fermentation growing a friendly microbe to starve a dangerous one. And one lucky food fighting the war entirely on its own. None of it was understood or tested the way a lab would explain it. Every piece was arrived at by watching thousands of batches fail, a handful survive, and repeating only what worked. And that's the actual answer to how a kingdom survived a war against bacteria in 120-degree heat. Not one clever trick, not a magic dessert doing the work for free, a layered overlapping system of physics and chemistry, built by people with zero microbiology, refined over centuries until it could feed a workforce, pay an army, and keep a civilization running for 3,000 uninterrupted years. They never once knew what they were fighting. They just kept winning anyway. It didn't always work. Bad harvests still rotted in bad years, and the record from Deir el-Medina proves people went hungry over exactly that. But the system worked often enough, for long enough, that when archaeologists open a 3,000-year-old jar today, the question usually isn't whether anything survived inside. It's what. That's the whole war, fought with salt, clay, and yeast, and mostly won. If you want more of the ordinary, unglamorous genius of daily life on the Nile, there's another one queued up right on your screen. Go watch that one next.